Hello everyone, it's Josh here. I'm going to try recording a set review for Dragons of Tarkir with a focus on Canadian Highlander and what cards we might see showing up in our decks. Set reviews are kind of fun, right? And just interesting, I think, to see how well you do. Look back and see, did you pick that card or not to be, to be a staple, or did you think this card was going to be great and it turned out not so good? That's a great way to work on your card evaluation. I definitely think someone trying to get better at Magic, it would be a great thing to, for each set, do a review with a focus on limited, and then go back and review that later on and see how accurate you were. Anyway, in this case, we'll take a look for cards that might show up in Canadian Highlander. And I've created 4 broad categories. Speculative cards, which maybe don't have a home in a competitive Tier 1 deck at the moment, but are interesting and might end up in a deck and have potential, have some strong potential, even if perhaps not a home right at the moment. Then there are, I'm going to show you the solid playables. These are cards that I expect to see in decks. They're not breaking the format, but I think they will show up. Then, what did I call it? Marginally playable, right? So solid playables, marginally playables, which are cards that might show up. They're okay, but they're maybe not the best. And finally, we'll have all-stars. So things like Dig Through Time, which I think most of the Highlander community knew was going to be quite a good card, or Tassiger, or going back a little bit further, Birthing Pod, which is even worth points. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to start with the speculative cards. So we start with a fairly poor speculative card. If you're going for some sort of aura build, probably want hexproof creatures, but just it's another card that gets bigger if you're sticking stuff on it. So just good to be aware that it's in the format. This is interesting, right? It's a very cheaply costed and potentially quite big. Is this really what you want? We can certainly be playing the 2 mana enchantment in white that ticks up each time you don't take damage, and once you get to 4 counters, you can create angels each turn. Spend mana and create angels. I'm blanking on the name right at the moment, but anyway, so again, this is a card I'm not sure that it has a home. It's not a card where I say, oh, this is going in deck X, but it's a reasonably powerful effect that's very well costed. Again, all it makes is 1 creature, but could be a very big creature. So put that there. Just interesting card to be aware of. This card is one of a number of the Dragon series where if we can consistently have a dragon in play or have a dragon in hand, this is obviously potentially a very playable card. Wall of Omens and Wall of Blossoms both see play, right? And this has flying. Obviously, if you can draw a card, it's pretty bad. So, again, I'm not aware of a deck that would consistently have a dragon in play or have a dragon in hand, but a potentially interesting card. This is kind of fascinating. Now, in that blue-white control deck that I played last year, probably around this time in March, I was playing Decree of Justice, and I was playing some equipment, right? The Stoneforged package, and Decree was pretty good. This doesn't draw you a card. And for an aggressive white deck, you can get a better, you got Spectral Procession, you got Raise the Alarm, you're getting a better rate on your mana, creatures per mana, at 2 and at 3. And I'm not sure that maybe if you just really want tokens, maybe this goes in that deck. Can it go in some white-based more controlling deck, which maybe you can cast for a lot? Is that really what you want to do? There's White Sun Zenith, which is 3 white and X, and it makes 2/2 cats, equal to whatever X is. Anyway, potentially a card to be aware of. And I just threw this in there in the speculative one just because it potentially gains you a lot of life. I don't think it's good enough to make the cut, but 2/4 in a metagame where there was a ton of mono red, probably played worse cards. So interesting card to be aware of because it does block. This is kind of cool. Again, I don't think this effect is one that we really need. I mean, what it does is it, in the later stages of the game, right, potentially creates maybe live the dream and exile cruel ultimatum, say. Let's create a 7/7, but a vanilla 7/7, is that good? Is it more of a win more? Like if they can't deal with your vanilla card and they have no blockers and you hit them, you get to cast a card for free? I don't know. Don't think so, but definitely an interesting card. This is just something that I'm not aware of, this effect at this cost. So again, there's not a deck where I say, oh yes, I would want to put this in there. But, there's definitely some, say, Bant comes into play, creatures type thing, where this might be worth looking at. And this, of course, if you are trying to build some sort of mono blue aggressive deck, this potentially gets in there fairly good, I think, for the cost. And I put this in here. Exploit, of course, is a new keyword, so we don't quite yet know how it's going to play out, right? We can try and think about it, how it's going to work, but we don't know for sure in terms of, we know how it's going to work, but we just don't know how that effect will end up playing in actual matches. So at the very worst, this is a sorcery speed unsummon, essentially. Is it, is there an upside for a deck that maybe wants to get creatures in the graveyard, that wants to sacrifice things, certainly it's in the wrong colors, but the Pattern Rector, right, is always looking for effects to sacrifice creatures, and it's a 0/4 as well, so I put this in there just as a card to be aware of, I guess. This is interesting. Again, I think we have better effects for lower cost, but in some enchantment deck, maybe Serge wants to put this in one of his classic enchantment decks. It is potentially the only win condition you need, right? So worth being aware of. This, again, if you can consistently have a dragon in play in hand, awesome. We'd love just another straight counterspell, blue counter target spell. Otherwise, pretty marginal. And this I just threw in there because I'm not aware of something similar to this. And while I don't have a deck that it goes in, it's a card just good to be aware of. This is kind of interesting, right? So you have a choice, of course. Are you turning your creatures into 2/2 zombies, or are you turning several creatures into a 4/4 or a 6/6 or an 8/8 zombie? Would say Alistair Howie Green Black Rock want to play this? I don't know if it plays enough creatures. Anyway, just an interesting effect. I think a potentially playable one over some of the other ones that remove cards from graveyard and make 1/1s. And this enters the battlefield. You exile all cards from a target opponent's graveyard. Oh, interesting. I read that is target player, so it's much worse than I thought, so probably shouldn't be in here. Anyway, just as, again, one of these crazy possibilities. And here, if this is just straight up, Searing Blaze with no drawback, not double red, and no landfall, amazing. Here, this is one that's probably closest to sort of marginally playable, or in that it's a fairly decent, unlike the counterspell, if you don't have the dragon, right? You kill the creature if that's what you're looking for. No problem. Still, obviously, we have so many like lightning strike effects now, incinerate type effects, that not being able to aim it at the player makes it pretty marginal. But mono red has some dragons, so I could definitely see this one getting played. If there's some dragon deck, good to be aware of this. I think it's well priced for that effect. And here, if you have a deck that's turning a lot of things face up and you want to be aggressive, these stats are not too bad. Just an interesting effect here. I wonder how it'll play out in format in modern, say with things like Archman Ravager. Again, I'm not really sure that there's a Highlander deck that wants it. And this I put in here because, man, look at all these things it can do. But the problem with this is, okay, so we could be playing Exclude, right? Counter target creature spell, draw a card for just a blue, 2 colorless. And here we're paying 1 more mana, we're having the white in here, we got some more options. The real problem I see with this is that this option has to be relevant. All three, so draw a card is always fine, but, you know, not amazing. We could be playing Dismiss. These two are both good against aggressive decks, gaining life and counter target creature spell. So we need this to be good against any type of deck, right? Because against, say, a control deck, this is looking pretty marginal. 4 mana to cycle and gain 4 life. And I'm not sure we're really set up to return target creature with a converted mana cost of 2 or less. I mean, sure, it buys back Snapcaster Mage. Maybe that's good. But I just don't see this doing enough. And there we are. Okay, so now we're going to move to solid playables. Haha. So these are cards I expect to see turning up. And this is actually, I think, one of the better ones. Just in that, for example, green-black, Alistair Howie Rock, I think, I haven't talked to him, but I assume this would make the cut. You know, it's already playing Skeletal Scrying, and this doesn't, not instant speed, 1 more mana, but doesn't rely on you having cards in your graveyard. And you can kill your opponent with it. And that deck, does generate enough mana, and Profane Command is already quite strong that one of the modes is just dome you for X, black X. And so I think this is, and like green black rock has ways of gaining life, so I think very solid playable card. I wasn't sure whether to put this in solid playable. So this is fire, right? And it's funny because Arc Trail is amazing. This is worse than Arc Trail. Forked Bolt is amazing. But that 1 extra mana, even though it's instant, I'm not sure. So in Goblins, I'm definitely playing Forked Bolt. I'm definitely playing Arc Trail. But am I playing Fire from Fire and Ice? I don't know. It just sits in an interesting spot. So, again, if you want, it's weird that we haven't had another card that does what Fire does. I think this will definitely see play. I don't think it's amazing, but I think it'll definitely see play. This, I just feel it's a pretty well-costed card for what it does, right? The fact that it's trample and reach is kind of nice. And just 3/2 for 2 with trample, it's pretty reasonable. And if you have some chance of having a +1/+1 counter on creatures, it seems quite strong. So I could be wrong, but I think this will definitely see play. This I put in here, this perhaps is a speculative card. I know, for example, Sam's Elf deck seems like this would be amazing. That you get to put them on the battlefield as instant speed. Does it see play in mono green ramp, right? Like the Ben Wheeler big green deck? Maybe not. Because it's not, these creatures are not the ones that are generally winning it for you. Like you're trying to ramp, and by the time you got mana to cast this, you're not looking to ramp into more ramp. But I just think an elf like Shell or something like that, this should definitely see play. So again, this maybe could be put in speculative, but I do think it is a quite strong effect in the appropriate deck, but that deck is fairly narrow. This one, so much worse than Eternal Witness. And you could be playing Regrowth if you're just wanting to return stuff. But it's like the fact it's nice that it can't be killed by 1/1s, right? 3/2 for like 3 mana and then 2 mana. Yeah, returning a card. It's not amazing. But I think it will see play. I think some mid-rangey decks will find a way to fit this in there. I could be wrong. Could be that this just isn't quite good enough. This one is pretty interesting. So it's essentially Skullcrack, right? And Skullcrack sees play. And so this is an upside. So if you're red-green, you're definitely playing this over a Skullcrack, I believe. This is not so great, but giving your creatures +1/+1 is reasonable. So dealing 3 to them and pumping your creatures. So I feel this is a very solid card. Not an amazing card, but I think this definitely sees play in red-green, for example. This is an interesting one. So I know that, what's that Sphinx? Prognostic Sphinx has seen some marginal play. And to my mind, this is better than Prognostic Sphinx in that it has hexproof, period, the turn you cast it, right? So that it defends itself. And in other words, like if they try to kill Prognostic Sphinx, you can give it hexproof, but it taps it, so then they swing in and kill you. So it's great. It's like the problem always within control deck is I don't want to tap out to cast a creature because I can't counter their spells now. So in this case, at least my creature has hexproof. And it's not as good a blocker as Prognostic Sphinx, but still pretty good. And then obviously when you're attacking, next turn you have a bunch of mana open. So the fact that it doesn't have hexproof, if you want to attack with it, is acceptable. And obviously, looking at the top 3 and drawing one of them, putting the rest on the bottom is a reasonable amount better than just scrying 3. Definitely worth trying out is some sort of top end in a control deck. This actually seems really solid. Jund and potentially Grixis Control want this. There's enough artifacts going around that I think destroying artifacts is always a good effect. And for Jund, of course, return target creature, carve from the graveyard to your hand. Grixis Control has a hard time with artifacts, so just the fact that, you can kill something and destroy an artifact, or at the very worst, you make them discard a card, buy back your Snapcaster. I think this will actually, it's kind of unassuming, but I think this will actually is one of the better commands for Highlander. And this guy just seems like a really solid Planeswalker. Rug doesn't see a ton of play, but Chris Sutherland's been running a really good Rug list. And obviously this is at 5 mana, he's more of a mid-range card. Really solid, but not broken or anything. I think we'll definitely see play. But that archetype doesn't see a ton of play. And oftentimes in Rug, you're maybe trying to be Rug combo. Or potentially Rug, faster Rug build that maybe doesn't want Sarkhan, but should see a solid amount of play. And there we are. Let's look at the marginal playables. So this one, on the face of it, looks pretty good, right? But and again, I haven't played enough White Weenie to be sure, but I'm just not sure that it does enough. Even if it said even if it said just another creature, so you'd follow it up with, say, Spectral Procession, it itself is just a 2/2. Like, I think a lot of times you'd rather have that Anthem effect rather than a creature that can be killed. Or, I mean, not a creature that can be killed, but just a creature that can be killed, right? The Anthem effect is fairly strong. Affects all your creatures. Certainly not bad, but not amazing. Right. Potentially interesting. Obviously, Silverblade Paladin is much better because it essentially has haste. It gets to give double strike to a creature the turn it comes into play. But if you want to be double striking, this is a reasonable card. And if you really want to be double striking, here's another card. Chris Sutherland, I'm talking to you. This is just good to be aware of. Obviously, Disenchant or Dismantling Blow, right, seem almost certainly better. But if the metagame is such that you really want to exile stuff, both artifacts and or enchantments, this is one to just be aware of. So again, I'm not sure. This could be a solid playable. Maybe this is an auto include in like aggressive white decks, but I don't think so. It's not bad, but the fact that it is 2/1 is fairly poor. I mean, it's okay. It's okay. I don't have enough experience again playing, say, mono white weenie to tell you for sure whether we're still. The problem with Highlander is, right, there's so many playables, right? You're competing with so many great cards for a slot in a deck. Interesting card. I'd love it to be good. One of the problems is, like, if this is in a control deck, is that all this stuff, you'd love to be able to attack, gain lifelink, and then exile it, and then be a blocker. But in order to do that, you have to cast a spell as it's attacking, give it first strike, cast a spell. Oh, this happens. Yeah, it returns tapped. It's even worse than I thought. Okay, but even if you wanted to have it gain life when you're attacking, you have to be casting spells during your turn. So anyway, I think this is cool. I just don't think it's going to get played. Anticipate. This is why I thought about it for a little bit. So it's worse than an impulse, right? It's better than Telling Time. Telling Time, I think, in the vast majority of cases, you would rather take one of the top 3 cards into your hand. So Telling Time, the difference between this and Telling Time, right? Telling Time says put one card look at the top 3, put a card into your hand, which you're going to do from this, put a card on the bottom of your library, which you're going to do from this, and then put a card on top of your library. So the question is, if we look at the top 3 cards of our library, what would we rather do? Put that card would we rather have a card, one of those 3 cards, be on top of our library or on the bottom, after having put one in our hand? And my answer to that would be that the vast majority of the time you'd rather have a card on the bottom. You'd rather take a new draw step. Just the potential, right? If you find 2 cards that you want, great, you're probably in a good situation because one of them is now in your hand. But in all those situations where you're having to put a card on top of your library that you don't really want to draw, that's pretty bad. And things like, say, a top situation where you kind of know we want to clear through, or things with Brainstorm or Jace, the Mind Sculptor, that ability to get a bunch of cards off the top of your deck is valuable. So again, I think this, if you're playing Telling Time, this replaces Telling Time. I feel Telling Time is kind of marginal. Impulse is actually not my favorite card either, but probably a necessary evil in many decks. It just replaces itself, right? And 2 mana, but instant speed. So I think this will see some play. It's possible it could be in the solid playables, but given that I'm not the hugest fan of Impulse, I'm putting here marginals. This is like a textbook definition of a marginal playable. I know Will, I think, plays Opportunity in Grixis Control. I've thought about it, playing it in several decks. If you're playing Opportunity, you should be probably playing this instead. And certainly if you have any chance, like if you've got a Mutavault in there, you should be playing this instead. if you're playing some red-blue aggressive deck with, the whole cues off, like all the creatures that get bigger when you cast spells, this goes in that deck, I guess. So this is actually a strong effect. It's just I'm not sure there's a deck for it. And probably Jeskai Tempo would be the deck. Does it go in, say, blue-green Sorensen? I don't know. I think you need a fairly aggressive deck in order to be playing this card, right? You want to be reasonably happy with the 2/1 or the 3/2 flyer in order to have this in here rather than some other counterspell, say. This guy is just purely based on how many warriors, and again, so like something like Jund seems like great stats. Like if you can reliably have another warrior in play, awesome. I think this guy goes right in there. If having a warrior in play is a problem, maybe not. So potentially pretty solid playable. And we already in black white have the guy who we get to vote and then blow up everything. This doesn't reliably blow up everything, but it's an interesting card, and just good to be aware of it. This card is kind of interesting. Does something like Green Black Rock want this? It's like that question of trading consistency for power. A Doomblade or whatever will kill something. Here we're getting a little bit greedy. We're paying a little bit more mana, but if like we were returning a good creature, we're quite happy to pay that, right? Like if this goes off, great. But what about those situations where we don't have a creature in our graveyard or it's not big enough? I mean, Wall of Blossoms kills a 4/4. Worth thinking about, I think. And this I just put in there as a possible card, say, for Pattern Rector, just because Pattern Rector does like sack effects. They like recurring sack effects a lot better. But this can be a pretty good effect in certain matchups. It can be pretty backbreaking against goblins or against mono green ramp, for example. Worth being aware of. And right, just in some sort of, say, I don't know, mono black aggro. Is this worth it? Potentially. Seems better than Phyrexian Negator. And this card, again, like I've had fun playing sort of rather than green black rock, red black kind of rock like deck. If you're playing blue, this is terrible. If you're not playing blue, maybe this is worth it. Obviously, you do this on your opponent's turn, typically, and so you have the rest of their turn and then your turn to cast those spells or play those cards. I can see this getting into, say, mono red, just having a flyer, right? Can be quite strong. Beat those moats. It's got fire breathing. And potentially this, I don't know. Marginal. Same as this potential. Hey, here's another dragon. Maybe that red burn spell, like maybe we can get enough dragons. I just think a 4/4 flyer for 4 in some red decks, maybe we're happy playing that. And what is this? Oh, so this is obviously a better version of Nantuko. Whatever it is, right? The morph from Onslaught that when it unmorphs, it does this, destroys an artifact or enchantment, which is a 3/2. The unmorph cost is the same, but it costs, to hardcast it, it costs 4, and it's a 3/2. So I think we'd much rather have the opportunity to cast this on turn 2 as a 2/1 if we need to, rather than this other one at 3/2. And potentially the +1/+1 counter is worth more. Like I think a 2/1 with a +1/+1 counter is probably most of the time worth more than a 3/2. The Nantuko, whatever it is, Vigilante is not seeing a ton of play, but this I think is an upgrade. This is an upgrade over Overgrowth, which just adds double green. Some decks may want that effect. And while this is not amazing, I mean, I was playing a junk Doran colored, whatever they call it, Asban, sort of good creatures. I'm not sure that I want this, but it certainly has some interesting text. Again, I think this costs too much, but potential. And finally, this does a bunch of things. This is fairly marginal, pretty marginal. It's nice to have some enchantment removal, free enchantment removal. I'm not sure that the like +1/+1 in fight is enough. In other words, this will happen rarely. This will happen fairly rarely as well. So is this ability, these two abilities, powerful enough to play this card? Selesnya Charm just seems better. But it's not the worst either. Too expensive, but it's tempting, right? Lots of value. These probably way too expensive to see play, but just interesting to be aware if you're looking for those type of ramp effects that these are around. And there we are. Okay, almost done. Sorry, this has taken longer than I thought it might. Let's look at the format All-Stars. Haha, this guy. Well, you know, he's maybe just a solid playable. I'm not sure that he's a real All-Star. So this is one that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, obviously it gets in Pattern Rector. 5 mana is a lot. If you're just sacrificing him, it's pretty bad. You know, you got to be a deck that wants a 4/6 Death Touch in play, but it has some creatures to sacrifice. But it's just hard to turn down like a 4/6 on a Demonic Tutor, right? Or a Demonic Tutor on a 4/6. So I definitely, I don't know. At the very least, I think this guy should see a reasonable amount of play. Could be wrong. This seems kind of cool in green ramp, right? Yes, you can't cast your Planeswalkers and etc., which is a fairly big drawback. 2/3 is decent stats. But this, is so tempting. And I don't know. I just, again, I haven't played, like the Ben Wheeler mono green, but I feel that this seems like it should be just go straight in there and will be quite strong. Could be wrong. This guy seems amazing. Or, wait a minute. Maybe not. No, sorry, just put that in there to troll you. Narsat, and I think she is potentially the best card for Highlander from the set. The only one I'm super excited about, I think. And just the fact that she comes down, has a reasonable chance of drawing you a card in a control deck, soaks up a bunch of damage, and is really hard to kill. You know, something like, say, Jace Architect of Thought has that same really annoying feel from the opposite side of the deck where you're, spending your whole turn just to knock his loyalty down a little bit, and you know that probably your opponent's going to untap and do something to your creatures, and anyway, so just, I love the fact that she can tick up, get to 7, and you potentially have drawn a card. This, I think, is actually pretty strong. Draw a bunch of cards, do a bunch of stuff, and then obviously this is great in any sort of control mirror if she's not too far away from it. So as I say, I think probably the best card for Highlander from the set. So there you go. Would love to hear your comments, and let's check back in maybe before next set and see how accurate I was. Cheers.